It began with a trembling voice and the sound of a single sob echoing through the courtroom. Betty Whittaker stood before the judge, clutching the edge of the table as though the polished wood itself could steady her. Her hands, worn from years of raising children and holding together a family that had already seen too much heartbreak, shook as the clerk read the list of state requirements: ADA compliance, home safety modifications, certified caregiver oversight. Each phrase landed like a blow dot. By the time the judge looked up, Betty's eyes were wet. Not just from the humiliation of public scrutiny, but from the quiet, private pain that came when love collided with bureaucracy. The Whittaker family, once known in their small southern town for their faith, humor, and stubborn resilience, had become a headline. State demands force family to rebuild. One paper read, elder couple under investigation for care standards. Read another, for Betty. None of those words mattered. What mattered was simple. Her family wasn't home. Her son, Larry, sat in the back row that day, silent and pale. His cane leaned against the bench beside him. A man in his 70s with a body far older than his years. He watched his mother try to make sense of a system that seemed designed to break her on the other side of the aisle. A representative from Adult Protective Services, EPSI, waited with a folder so thick it barely closed. Inside were photographs, inspection reports, handwritten notes, all painting a portrait of the Whittaker home as unsuitable for dependent care. The smell of mildew. The cluttered hallways. The lack of handrails and ramps. To the state, it was paperwork. To Betty, it was shame. She had raised 4 children in that house, 2 biological, 2 adopted from within the extended family, and buried a husband there. It was the same home where she'd celebrated birthdays, healed from surgeries, and prayed through countless storms, both literal and emotional. Now, that same house was being described in court as unsafe, non-compliant, and unfit. Mrs. Whittaker, the judge said softly, the court recognizes your devotion to your family, but devotion is not a substitute for safety. Until your residence meets the requirements outlined by the Department of Human Services, custody of your dependents cannot be restored. Betty nodded, lips pressed tight to keep from breaking down. Outside the courthouse, the autumn wind carried the smell of rain. A small group of supporters waited, neighbors, church members, a few loyal followers from social media who had driven in after hearing her story. Miss Betty, we love you. One woman called as Betty emerged, leaning on her cane. Cameras flashed beside her. Brian, a longtime family friend and local advocate, put a hand on her shoulder. Don't say nothing yet. Miss Betty, let's get you to the car first. Her voice came out thin, barely more than a whisper. They want to take my home away from me, Brian. They want to take my babies home. He shook his head. They want you to fix it up, that's all. Make it safe. We'll figure it out. But even as he said it, his expression betrayed the truth. The repairs alone would cost more than Betty's entire yearly income inside the courthouse lobby. An APES spokesperson gave a brief statement to the press. Today's hearing was about ensuring the long-term well-being of the Whittaker dependents. This is not about punishment. It's about protection. The state is asking for minimum compliance with health and safety standards. When asked if the family's age and financial situation would be considered, the spokesperson replied, "We have programs available for those willing to cooperate, but compliance is non-negotiable." That phrase, non-negotiable, echoed through every conversation that followed later that evening. In her small kitchen filled with old ceramic angels and family photos, Betty sat quietly as her daughter Lorraine read through the state's list of demands. "Mama," she said, eyes scanning the document, "they want the whole house rewired. New flooring in the bathroom, handrails on both stairways, fire extinguishers in every room. Carbon monoxide detectors, too." Betty just stared at her cup of coffee. The steam had already faded. "And," Lorraine continued, "they want proof that you or someone in the home is certified in first aid and CPR?" Betty looked up, her voice fragile. "You mean to tell me they want me to go to school now? At my age?" Lorraine exhaled. "It's not school, Mama, just a class." "I can help you with it." Betty shook her head. They act like I ain't been caring for people my whole life. I raised kids, took care of my husband, fed half this town during hard times. Now they tell me I don't know how to keep my own family safe. Brian came by after dark, the porch light flickering as he climbed the steps. He carried his phone, already recording. "Miss Betty," he said softly, "I just want folks to hear from you tonight. People been asking what happened in court. You okay with me sharing this?" She hesitated, then nodded. He started filming. "Betty, you had court today. Tell us how you feel." Her voice cracked before the first word left her mouth. "I feel tired. Brian, I feel like they think I'm something dirty. Like I don't love my own family. But I do. I always have." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I just want them home. That's all." The video went viral overnight. Thousands of comments poured in, some sympathetic, others harsh. "She's doing her best. The state needs to back off. Those living conditions sound awful. This is about safety, not sympathy. Where's the community support? Why can't they help her fix the house?" Even local media picked it up, calling it the Whittaker dilemma. But behind the trending hashtags and emotional interviews was a simple reality. Betty's future depended on bureaucracy. And bureaucracy had no heart. In the following days, the family scrambled to comply. Lorraine made lists. Larry called contractors who never called back. Friends from church organized small fundraisers, bake sales, car washes, online donations. But the mountain was too steep. Each modification cost hundreds, sometimes thousands. And every time they fixed one issue, another appeared. The bathroom needed non-slip flooring. The kitchen wiring was outdated. The front porch sagged an inch too low to meet code. Betty kept working anyway, moving through the house with quiet determination. She dusted shelves that hadn't been touched in years. She scrubbed the walls, replaced curtains, opened windows to let light flood in. "This is my home," she whispered as she worked. "They're not going to take it from me." But every night, when the work was done, she sat in her chair and wept. Meanwhile, APS maintained its stance. A caseworker named Elaine Porter filed weekly reports, noting progress but emphasizing deficiencies. Partial compliance achieved. One report read, "AD adjustments still pending. Home remains unsuitable for dependent care." Privately, Elaine confided in a colleague, "I hate this part. She's not a bad woman. She's just old and poor and proud. But the law doesn't bend for that." The colleague nodded. "You can't write compassion into code." By the time the second hearing was scheduled, the tension had reached its breaking point. Brian prepared another statement online, urging the community to rally behind Betty. "She's done everything they asked, and still they moved the goalpost," he said, but the court didn't deal in emotion. It dealt in documents, inspections, compliance forms, and deadlines. And for every day the house remained non-compliant, Betty's family remained under state supervision. On the morning of the next hearing, Betty, dressed in her Sunday best, a lavender blouse and pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. Her hands shook as she pinned her hair back. Lorraine helped her into the car, whispering, "You did everything you could, Mama." Betty's voice trembled. "It ain't enough for them. It never is." When they arrived, cameras were already waiting outside the courthouse. Brian stood among them, live streaming. "She's walking in now, folks," he said, his voice hushed. Miss Betty Whittaker, 76 years old, facing the fight of her life. As Betty stepped into the courtroom, the murmurs died down. The judge entered, and silence settled like a storm about to break. The gavel struck once, and with it came the sound of another tear falling onto the table before her. The sound of the gavel still echoed through the courtroom as Betty Whittaker tried to steady herself in the witness chair. Her cane rested against the rail beside her, its rubber tip worn smooth from years of use. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, the judges, the lawyers, the state's representatives, even the audience packed into the gallery. Whispering in the charged silence, she wiped at her cheeks and straightened her shoulders. The judge, an older woman with a voice that carried both authority and weariness, adjusted her glasses and looked down at the paperwork before her. "Mrs. Whittaker," she began, "you understand why we're here today." The court has reviewed the updated home inspection and your compliance report. Before we proceed, is there anything you'd like to say on your own behalf? Betty's voice quivered, but her words came steady. Your Honor, I did everything they asked me to do. I fixed what I could. My daughter helped me with the paperwork. We cleaned the whole house from top to bottom. I even took that CPR class like they told me. A ripple of murmurs moved through the gallery. Sympathy, disbelief, curiosity. The state's attorney, a younger man with a crisp blue suit and expressionless eyes, leaned forward. Mrs. Whittaker, while the court acknowledges your efforts, the home inspection revealed continued deficiencies that pose safety concerns for the dependents in your care. Betty blinked, confusion mixing with exhaustion. Deficiencies? I don't understand. We did what y'all said. The attorney opened a file and read aloud, improper installation of handrails. Outdated electrical wiring in 2 rooms. Inadequate fire safety equipment. And structural instability in the back porch stairway. Betty's lips parted in disbelief. I put new batteries in every smoke detector. My grandson did them himself. The porch, it's old, but it's strong. It's been there 50 years. The attorney continued, unmoved. The court's concern is not whether it has stood for 50 years, Mrs. Whittaker, but whether it meets the current state safety code. That phrase again, code. It sounded mechanical, cold, soulless, from the back of the courtroom. Brian shifted uncomfortably in his seat, filming the proceedings on his phone. He wasn't supposed to, but that never stopped him before. This is what we're dealing with, he whispered into the camera. A 76-year-old woman being grilled like she's on trial for a crime. All because her house doesn't meet some bureaucratic checklist. A bailiff motioned for him to stop recording, but he just lowered the phone and kept whispering, "Y'all see this? They call it justice. I call it cruelty." Back on the stand, Betty's attorney, a gray-haired woman named Sarah Lang, rose to her feet. Your Honor, may I speak? The judge nodded. Double quotes. Mrs. Whittaker has complied to the best of her ability. This is not a woman neglecting her family. This is a grandmother of limited means, doing everything within her power to meet the court's standards. She's invested every dollar she has and every ounce of dignity, trying to satisfy the state's demands. The problem isn't her effort. The problem is the system. The courtroom grew still. Lang continued, voice rising with quiet conviction. We are asking the state to show some humanity. Mrs. Whittaker has provided decades of care. She has not once been accused of abuse or neglect. If the goal here is family preservation, then the path forward should be support, not punishment. Across the aisle, the state's attorney crossed his arms. With all due respect, Counselor, the law doesn't operate on sentiment. It operates on standards. Lang turned sharply toward him. And sometimes those standards crush the very people they're meant to protect. The judge raised a hand. That's enough. The tension broke like a wire pulled too tight. When the hearing recessed for lunch, Betty sat quietly in the hallway outside the courtroom. Lorraine handed her a bottle of water and a tissue. Her son Larry sat nearby, leaning on his cane, his jaw tight. I can't listen to them talk about you like that, he muttered. Like we're animals in a cage? Betty squeezed his hand. Don't say that. They just doing their job. Larry shook his head. No, Mama, they're doing their paperwork. That's different. Brian approached cautiously, still holding his phone. Miss Betty, people are watching online. They're saying they want to help. Some are offering to donate for the repairs. Betty looked up at him, eyes red. I don't want handouts, Brian. I just want my family back. He hesitated, then nodded. I know. But sometimes you gotta let people love you a little. Inside the courtroom after lunch, the APSACE worker, Elaine Porter, took the stand. She adjusted her blazer and looked visibly uncomfortable as the state attorney began questioning her. Miss Porter, you conducted the most recent inspection of the Whittaker residence, correct? Yes. And in your professional opinion, is the home currently suitable for dependent care? Elaine hesitated. It's improving, but not yet compliant. Can you elaborate? She sighed. Mrs. Whittaker has made a significant effort. The home is cleaner, safer, and more organized than before. However, there are structural concerns that fall outside her control. The property needs professional work, electrical rewiring, plumbing adjustments, accessibility modifications, things that can't be done without funding. Lang stood for cross-examination. Miss Porter, would you say Mrs. Whittaker has demonstrated cooperation and willingness to comply? Yes. Would you also say she's been respectful, responsive, and proactive in addressing your concerns? Yes. Then why, Lang pressed, hasn't the state provided assistance? There are grants for elder home modification programs, community rehabilitation funds, even volunteer partnerships. Why was none of that offered to Mrs. Whittaker? Elaine's shoulders slumped. Because the program funding ran out 2 years ago. The courtroom went quiet. Lang turned to the judge. So we are punishing a woman not for her negligence, but for the government's failure to fund its own safety initiatives. The judge's pen hovered over her notes, but she said nothing. Outside, reporters were already gathering near the courthouse steps. Betty Whittaker's fight for her family continues, one newscaster announced into the camera. The 76-year-old grandmother faces mounting. State requirements, she says, are impossible to meet without help. The footage of Betty wiping her eyes played on loop that evening across local stations, each outlet framing her as either a victim or a cautionary tale, but behind the headlines. Betty just sat at her kitchen table that night, staring at the court order in front of her, fire extinguishers, window ladders, CPR certification. Her voice trembled as she read, "They want me to turn my home into a hospital." Lorraine rubbed her shoulder. "We'll get there, Mama, one step at a time." Betty nodded weakly. "One step at a time," she repeated, though her eyes said otherwise. The next morning, the phone wouldn't stop ringing, reporters, advocates, strangers from across the country offering support. Some even offered to fly in to help rebuild the house. Brian posted a new video. Tears in the courtroom. The fight ain't over. In it, he said, they can throw codes and regulations all they want. But what I saw today was a woman fighting with everything she's got. The state says she's unfit. I say she's a mother who refuses to quit. Maybe the law forgot how to be human, but we didn't. Within hours, donations began pouring in online. The community rallied, raising thousands in a single day. Still, Betty felt uneasy. "I don't want folks thinking I'm begging," she told Brian. "You're not begging," he replied softly. "You're surviving." Meanwhile, the court scheduled a final compliance review for 30 days later. Betty had 1 month to meet every requirement. The app's caseworker stopped by to check progress and found Betty kneeling in the living room, scrubbing the baseboards herself. "Mrs. Whittaker, you don't have to do all this alone," Elaine said gently. Betty didn't look up. "Who else gonna do it?" Elaine hesitated. "There are volunteers now. People who care. Let them help." Betty sat back on her heels, sighing. "I've been taking care of people my whole life. Feels strange to have someone take care of me." Elaine smiled sadly. "Maybe it's your turn." As the sun set over the small southern town, the sound of hammers echoed from the Whittaker home. Volunteers patched drywall, rewired sockets, and installed new railings. Children from the neighborhood delivered sweet tea and sandwiches. Betty sat on the porch, watching it all unfold. "This used to be the noisiest house on the block," she said quietly. "Laughter, fighting, singing, babies crying. Now the only sound I hear is nails and wood, and it breaks my heart." Lorraine put an arm around her. "They'll come home, Mama, you'll see." Betty looked out toward the setting sun, her eyes glistening. If love could build a house, it'd be done already. Inside the courthouse, paperwork shuffled. Outside, cameras waited. And somewhere in between stood a woman who refused to give up, no matter how many tears she shed. No matter how steep the state's demands became, because to Betty Whittaker, compliance wasn't just a checklist. It was a promise. The smell of sawdust and fresh paint filled the Whittaker home. For the first time in years, sunlight streamed freely through the clean, newly replaced windows. The faded curtains were gone, replaced by light lace that fluttered softly in the breeze. The old sagging porch had been rebuilt, the floorboards gleaming with fresh varnish. The walls, once yellowed by time and smoke, now glowed a pale blue, Betty's favorite color, yet beneath the noise of drills and hammers there was another sound, a soft, persistent ache that lived in Betty's chest. "Careful with that corner," she called from her chair by the doorway. "That's where the baseboard cracked." The volunteers nodded, smiling politely. They worked quickly and efficiently. Mostly young people from church or local outreach programs who had seen Betty's story online. Ryan was there too. Camera in hand, broadcasting live once again. "We're out here with Miss Betty today," he said, his voice rising above the sound of construction. "Y'all, look at this miracle. The people showed up. The internet showed up. Love showed up." The comments scrolled fast on his screen. "God bless you, Miss Betty. Wish I could be there to help. The state should be ashamed. This woman has more community than their whole department." Betty smiled faintly at the screen, but her eyes were heavy. "They mean well," she murmured. "But love don't pay the inspector." Inside the kitchen, Lorraine was on the phone again. Her tone clipped with frustration. "No, ma'am. The inspector's appointment was supposed to be next Thursday." "Yes, I understand protocol, but my mother's elderly. We just need confirmation." She hung up with a sigh. "They moved it up," she said quietly. "They're coming Monday." "Monday?" Betty frowned. "That's 4 days from now." Lorraine nodded. "We'll be ready." But both women knew the truth. They weren't. The bathroom still needed new tile to prevent slipping. The back door wouldn't close all the way. And the electric bill had doubled since the renovations began. The work crews had plugged in so many tools that the wiring kept flickering. Still, Betty refused to let panic show. "We'll get it done," she said, folding her hands like she was saying a prayer. "We've come too far to stop now." That night, when the last hammer quieted and the volunteers went home, Betty walked through each room of her house slowly. Her cane tapping softly against the floor. In the corner of the living room sat a box of family photographs, her husband in his uniform. Her children at Christmas, her late sister laughing in the kitchen. She picked one up and brushed the dust from the frame. "You'd laugh if you saw this place now," she whispered to the picture. "It's cleaner than it's ever been, but it don't feel like home yet. Not without them here." The clock ticked loud in the silence. Betty pressed the photo to her chest and closed her eyes. The next morning brought a rainstorm. Sheets of water beat down on the roof, turning the red clay driveway into thick mud. Brian showed up anyway, who'd pulled over his head, recording another update. "Y'all, we're still out here," he said, standing under his umbrella. "Rain or shine, this family's working. The inspection's Monday, and Miss Betty ain't backing down." Inside, Lorraine was mopping near the front door when the lights flickered again. "Lord, not now," she muttered. Larry, sitting in his chair by the window, said quietly, "You know that wiring's old, right? They told us last time it needs a full replacement." Lorraine sighed. "We can't afford that right now, Daddy." Betty looked up from her Bible. "Then we pray it holds." The words came simple, but they carried a weight heavier than electricity. When Monday came, the rain had cleared. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. The APS inspector arrived promptly at 9, a young man named Matthew Cole, professional and polite but detached. His clipboard was full before he even stepped inside. "Good morning, Mrs. Whittaker," he said. "We're just here to follow up on the corrective measures." Betty smiled weakly. "Come on in, son." "Don't mind the mess. We're still putting things in order." Lorraine hovered behind her mother as the inspector moved through the house, checking outlets, handrails, and smoke detectors with clinical precision. His pen scratched against paper, marking each item with either a check or a note. He spoke very little. When he reached the bathroom, he paused. "This tile isn't slip-resistant," he said. Lorraine stepped forward quickly. "It's temporary. The new flooring's been ordered. It just hasn't arrived yet." He nodded but wrote something down. Then, in the hallway, he tapped the handrail. "Slightly loose." "I can tighten that," Larry said from his chair. "Just give me the drill." The inspector glanced at him but didn't reply. By the time he finished, 2 hours had passed. "Well," he said, tucking his papers away, "you've made substantial progress. The home is in far better condition than before. However," that word hung heavy in the air, "there are still items outstanding. Electrical updates, accessibility compliance, and flooring repairs. I'll submit my report to the court." Betty clutched her hands together. "So what does that mean? Can they come home?" He hesitated. "Not yet, ma'am. But you're closer than before." Then he left, leaving behind silence and the faint smell of rain on his shoes. That night, the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the new floorboards. Lorraine sat beside her mother, exhausted. "We did everything right," she whispered. "Everything." Betty nodded, eyes glistening. "And still not enough." Across the room, Brian sat with his camera off for once. "Miss Betty," he said softly, "you know, I've covered a lot of stories like this, but I ain't never seen someone fight this hard." She smiled faintly. "It's easy to fight when you love who you're fighting for." The next morning, the state's report went public. Local news ran with the headline, "Whittaker home shows progress, still fails to meet state code." Comment sections exploded. Some blamed the government. Others accused Betty of mismanaging donations. The debate turned cruel fast, strangers dissecting her life like a case study. Lorraine begged her mother not to look at the comments. But Betty couldn't help herself. "They think I'm lazy," she whispered, scrolling through the phone. "They think I'm the reason my family's not home." Brian posted a response video that same night. "Listen up. You can argue all you want, but this woman don't owe you nothing. The system's the problem, not her. If love and labor were worth anything in court, Betty would have won months ago." The video reached over 500,000 views in 24 hours. Meanwhile, Elaine Porter, the app's caseworker, read the report at her desk. She frowned, tapping her pen against the page. She knew Betty's case should have been closed long ago. The Whittaker home wasn't perfect, but neither were most family homes in the state. The problem wasn't safety, it was standards written for people with money. That afternoon, she made a quiet decision. She called her supervisor. "I'd like to recommend conditional clearance for the Whittaker home," she said. "They've met every possible requirement within reason." Her supervisor sighed. "Elaine, the policy's clear." "No exceptions." "Then maybe the policy's wrong," she said softly. 2 days later, Elaine showed up at the Whittaker home unannounced. Betty met her at the door, startled. "Mrs. Whittaker?" Elaine said, stepping inside. "I wanted to tell you in person. I've submitted an appeal to the review board. It's not official yet, but I'm going to bat for you." Betty blinked, stunned. "You'd do that?" "For me?" Elaine nodded. "Because it's the right thing to do. You've done your part. Now it's our turn." For the first time in weeks, Betty's eyes filled not with tears of sorrow, but with relief. That night, the neighborhood gathered outside the Whittaker home for what Brian called a community blessing. They lit candles along the sidewalk, singing softly under the stars. Betty sat on the porch, her family beside her, her hands trembling as she whispered, "Thank you. Lord, just let this be enough." The lights from the candles flickered across the porch steps, casting long, gentle shadows, not of despair this time, but of faith. For months, the house had been called unsafe. Now, for the first time in a long while, it felt like home. In the courthouse downtown, a clerk stamped the date on the appeal. "Whittaker v. State of Alabama, conditional clearance, hearing scheduled." It was official. The fight wasn't over. But this time, Betty wasn't alone. The morning of the final hearing dawned quiet and gray, the kind of sky that seemed to hold its breath. Betty Whittaker sat on the edge of her bed, her Bible open but unread. Her fingers traced the thin pages as though the words might steady her trembling hands. "Lord," she whispered, "I've done all I can. The rest is yours." In the next room, Lorraine helped her father button his shirt. The old man's hands shook too much to do it himself. "You sure you want to go today, Daddy?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Ain't no way I'm letting your mama face them folks alone." By 8:30, they were on their way to the courthouse. The small car moved slow through the streets of town, streets where neighbors waved, where local shops had placed handmade signs in their windows. "We stand with Betty." The courthouse was crowded when they arrived. Cameras lined the steps. Reporters whispered into microphones. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. Betty took her seat at the front table, clutching her cane like a lifeline. Across from her sat the state's attorney, the same young man, immaculate as ever, flipping through his file, Elaine Porter. The app's caseworker was there too, her expression calm but resolute. The judge entered. The gavel struck once, echoing like thunder in the quiet room. "Court is now in session," she said. "This hearing concerns the conditional clearance request for Mrs. Betty Whittaker." Sarah Lang, Betty's attorney, stood first. "Your Honor, my client has done everything the state demanded, and more. She has renovated her home, undergone training, and cooperated fully with every inspection. The home is now safe, stable, and approved by multiple independent evaluators. The only thing missing is compassion." The judge listened, pen poised above her notes. Lang continued. "This case has drawn national attention not because it's unusual, but because it's far too common. An elderly woman punished for poverty, not negligence. The Whittaker home is ready. It's time to let her family come home." The state's attorney rose next, his tone cool. "Your Honor, while Mrs. Whittaker's efforts are commendable, certain compliance issues remain unresolved. We cannot set a precedent that emotional appeals outweigh legal standards. The law must apply equally, regardless of sympathy." He turned slightly, gesturing toward Betty. "The question is not whether she loves her family, that is clear. The question is whether her home meets the required safety code. And by the state's own assessment, it does not." Betty flinched. Lorraine reached for her hand under the table. Lang stood again. "Your Honor, the state's code may not bend, but it can recognize good faith. Mrs. Whittaker has proven she is capable, willing, and devoted. The minor issues cited are non-critical and already scheduled for repair." Then, unexpectedly, the judge looked toward the back of the courtroom. "Miss Porter," she said, "as the caseworker overseeing this matter, what is your recommendation?" Elaine rose slowly. "Your Honor, I've worked for this department 15 years. I've seen neglect, abuse, and true danger. This is none of those things. The Whittaker home is not perfect, but it is safe. It is loving. It is stable. I believe the family should be reunited immediately." A murmur spread through the gallery. The judge nodded once, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Miss Porter." For a long moment, silence filled the room. The only sound was the soft tick of the clock on the wall. Then the judge spoke. "This court has reviewed all documentation, inspections, and testimony. Mrs. Whittaker has demonstrated extraordinary commitment to compliance and to her family's well-being. While the state raises valid procedural concerns, those concerns do not outweigh the evidence of her progress and capability." She looked directly at Betty. "Mrs. Whittaker, the court hereby grants conditional clearance. Your family may return home under continued supervision for a 90-day period. After that, pending review, full custody and guardianship will be reinstated." Betty blinked, stunned. "They can come home?" she whispered. The judge smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am, they can come home." The courtroom erupted. Lorraine hugged her mother, both women sobbing openly. Larry bowed his head, whispering, "Thank you, Lord." Even Elaine smiled through tears she tried to hide outside. When Betty stepped into the sunlight, the crowd waiting on the steps began to cheer. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, voices shouting questions. Brian was there, live once again. "Miss Betty, you did it." She raised her hand, wiping her tears. "No, baby," she said softly into his camera. "We did it." The video went viral within hours. That evening, the Whittaker house came alive again. Neighbors brought food. Fried chicken, cornbread, casseroles, the kind of meal that meant victory in the South. Children played in the yard. The porch lights glowed warm against the dusk. Inside, Betty sat in her favorite chair, surrounded by family. Laughter filled the air, cutting through months of silence. Lorraine turned to her. "You can finally rest, Mama." Betty smiled tiredly. "Maybe tomorrow. Tonight I just want to listen." She closed her eyes as the sound of her family's voices swirled around her, the music she'd fought for, but even amid the joy, she knew something deeper had changed. This wasn't just her victory. It was a mirror held up to a broken system, one that measured care in paperwork and compassion in compliance. When a local reporter asked her later what she thought the real lesson was, Betty didn't hesitate. "Love's the only thing that makes a house safe," she said. "You can fix walls, patch floors, and paint over anything, but if there ain't love in it, it's still broken." Her words aired that night on every news channel in the state. A week later, Elaine filed her final report. The Whittaker home meets conditions for ongoing placement. Family is stable, cooperative, and thriving. Recommend permanent reunification. The file closed with a single note at the bottom. Sometimes, the right thing isn't written in policy, it's written in people. As autumn settled over the town, Betty sat on her rebuilt porch, sipping tea while the sun dipped low over the horizon. The house creaked softly, alive again with laughter, prayer, and the smell of supper cooking inside. She looked out across her yard, the candles from that community vigil still sitting on the steps, their wax melted but their message lasting. For the first time in a long while, the silence felt peaceful. She whispered into the wind, "We made it home." And this time, even the house seemed to sigh in relief. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.